Bienvenue, mesdames et messieurs. Our next conversation is on leadership and how we are rethinking leadership and strategy in the face of new challenges. In the spirit of welcoming global leadership to this exclusive group, it is my pleasure to introduce James Gorman, Chairman and CEO, Morgan Stanley. He joins us by video link this afternoon, and I will host him in a virtual fireside chat format for about the next 25 minutes. So by way of introduction, James Gorman became CEO of Morgan Stanley in January 2010 and chairman in January 2012. He joined the firm in 2006 and became co-president about 18 months later. Before he joined Morgan Stanley, he held a succession of executive positions at Merrill Lynch, and prior to that, he was a senior partner at McKinsey. He began his career as an attorney in Melbourne, Australia. Among his civic duties, which are many, Mr. Gorman serves as a director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a director on the Council of Foreign Relations, and co-chair of the Board of Overseers of the Columbia Business School. He also serves as co-chairman of the Partnership for New York City, chairman of SIFMA, certainly an organization I know well in my profession, and co-chairman of the Business Committee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So born in Australia, Mr. Gorman received his BA in law degrees from the University of Melbourne and an MBA degree from Columbia University. So welcome, bienvenue, James, to this leadership conversation today. So let's start off with your perspectives on the global macro environment. So from a macro perspective, leaders around the world have really mounted dramatic and effective responses to the global pandemic. And I'm very interested in your perspective on the economic recovery, the outlook for global growth and US growth in light of all the challenges we currently face. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Susan, for having me live from New York City. Sorry that I can't be there this time in person, and I wish you well with the conference. It's certainly an extraordinary agenda you've put together. So, the world is in a very unusual place right now. We have synchronized global economic growth. In other words, almost every part of the world is recovering. Ordinarily, you'd have some parts of the world going up, some going down, but we have global synchronized growth. We have record low interest rates, although we're starting to see the early signs of different governments moving on interest rates. And we have extraordinary fiscal stimulus. So the combination of those three things leads inevitably to strong economic growth, and has brought with it, obviously, significant wage inflation and other supply chain inflation risks, which some people think are transitory. We can talk about that. But the bottom line is the global economy is in good shape. It's in remarkable shape given what we've been through with COVID for the last couple of years. How that plays out and what bubbles are being built by this very cheap money is what we're going to find out over the next several months. Absolutely. Now, is there anything about this economic recovery that we're witnessing, anything that's really surprised you, James? I guess it surprised me at just how fast and furious it has come. Yeah. I mean, remember, it was March 2020 when, at least in the US, we're in the depths of despair of COVID. The markets were, under serious pressure. Parts of the economy were, there are whole industries, Susan, that were, the retailing industry, the airline industry, transportation, tourism, you name it. So many industries which were in devastating positions, the car industry. So to be back where we are now, less than 2 years from that point, I think is pretty remarkable. Now, it's the power of very cheap money, the power of the undeniable desire of consumers to consume once they're let out of their caves, which we've been living in during COVID. And obviously the fiscal stimulus that has come with it, the support the governments gave to people who'd lost their jobs and small businesses and so on. But it is pretty remarkable how well it worked.
Yeah, I would agree. And we rolled out globally a lot of playbooks that were used in the last credit crisis. And I think those playbooks actually really proved to get, money into the hands of consumers where it needed to be for people to get through to the other side here. So I guess the other question I would ask you is, are we in the last innings here of this global pandemic? We had some really exciting news on screen on Friday in and around perhaps, an antiviral that could be, tremendously powerful and as part of a COVID-19 solution.
Well, viruses are not new, and pandemics are not new. Go back to the plagues in Europe centuries ago. So, and we had a precursor to COVID, of course. It was SARS, and we had MERS from the Middle East, and we will have more viruses. That's the reality. What is sort of stunning about this particular one was how quickly it went global, from very small facilities spread globally in a matter of weeks. How devastating it was in all corners of the earth, but also what the response from the biotech industry was in developing vaccines in, unheard of periods of time. So as aggressive as the virus was, the science and technology behind vaccine development was as aggressive, and it sort of met it match for match. So yeah, we're going to have more viruses. I don't know if we're currently having a variant on COVID. Do we have a gamma variant, epsilon variant? I don't know. We're in the Delta variant. So yeah, there'll be more viruses. This is what you have to live with, just like we've lived with the flu. This is obviously much more potent than the flu. So I think we just have to steel ourselves that this increasingly in a global world with global movement of people, viruses, nobody told the virus about anti-globalization. It didn't hear about border restrictions, right? That viruses don't belong to countries or individuals, they belong to the planet.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've set the stage, we've talked about the global macro context and how, the recovery is coming fast and furious from a global macro perspective. Now let's change gears and let's talk about transformational change and strategy, particularly as it relates to your leadership at Morgan Stanley. Now, when you first became CEO in 2010, what were your key objectives? What was your vision, and how did you actually turn that vision into action? And I must say, I did have the opportunity to listen to your Q3 earnings report, and gosh, the growth that you've driven in your asset management and wealth business is remarkable. I think it's 9-fold increase in assets since 2012. So was this part of the vision back in 2010?
Well, we had, when I became president in 2007 as the first signs of the subprime crisis were imploding, Morgan Stanley actually had a $10 billion loss on one trade, which was, I think, in all of history, probably the largest single loss. It destroyed a third of our capital that we'd accumulated over 75 years, one trade. So the initial focus when I became CEO and a little before that as co-president, we were very fragile. We needed to move from fragility to stability. And to do that, we had to amputate the parts of Morgan Stanley that could give rise to us tipping from fragility to, frankly, death, as most of the industry disappeared. Two firms became banks, us and Goldman Sachs, and everybody else either disappeared or was subsumed into global banks. So we were right on the edge. So my first priority was how to ensure we take away the risk that we tilt further should this market turn against us. So we started shutting down our prop trading businesses. We got out of prop investing. We sold our oil storage and shipping businesses. And we got back to the core, which is we exist as a conduit of the flow of capital between those who have it and those who don't, between issuers and investors, between borrowers and savers. Our job is to be an agent, not a principal. Once you accept that reality and stop trying to be a hedge fund or a private equity firm or something which operates in many cases as quasi-principal and agent or sole principal, you have a very different mentality. So then our desire was to build up the agency side of the business, and the easiest part of that to build, I felt, and the most stable were the fee-based businesses in wealth and asset management. And you're right, at the time I joined in 2006, I think our total assets were about 500 billion, 600 billion, and we're now, at the end of the quote, we're at somewhere around 6.5 trillion. So it worked. We've built our desire, Susan, in very plain English, was to build a new aircraft carrier. that had the ballast that wealth and asset management gives you when the seas are very rough, but had the speed in the engine room that our trading businesses and our capital markets businesses and our M&A businesses give you when the economy is moving forward very, very strongly. So it's that combination of speed and ballast, which was the sort of basic architecture of what we're trying to do. Executing it's a little more complicated, but the vision was very clear in my mind right from the get-go.
Interesting. So speed and balance. Let's carry those themes through 2020. In the midst of the pandemic, you announced two very large acquisitions, E-Trade and Eaton Vance, and also you picked up a Canadian company, Solium, along the way. As you think about this notion of speed and balance, how do those acquisitions actually fit within your broader strategy, and what made those targets actually interesting to you from a strategic fit and a cultural fit perspective?
Well, they were different. The first acquisition we did was Solium, which is a company based in Calgary, a fabulous, innovative, really a tech company, pure tech company, and it was built around providing the tools and applications for people to have their stock plans managed by corporations. So that put us into the stock plan business in a meaningful way. We then purchased E-Trade, and the reason for that, Susan, was not necessarily because we're looking at chasing down the last, cheap online trade. We're more focused on the fact it had a huge stock plan business, which sat with Solium. It gave us digital capability, which we've been building, and immediately gave us the platforms which would take us several years to build. And I doubt we would have built them as well as E-Trade. And it gave us a bank, which made our total deposits now $300 billion, one of the largest banks in the US. Eaton Vance was a completely different transaction. That was an asset management deal. But with that, it gave us some very interesting, both of these deals, all three of these deals were designed to provide growth verticals for Morgan Stanley. Solium put us into the stock plan business where millions and millions of our clients manage their wealth through their employer and their stock plan. E-Trade put us into digital banking, digital trading, and the stock plan business. Eaton Vance put us into the customized tax product that Parametric has. Calvert Funds, one of the best sustainability fund groups in the world. And it gave enormous mass to our fixed income and other asset management businesses. So the combination of these, we spent nearly $20 billion on it in the middle of COVID, which some people thought was a bit aggressive, but sometimes the timing isn't your friend. And yes, we had a social and health and economic crisis going on, but my job is to think about Morgan Stanley 10 years and 20 years from now, not 10 weeks from now. And if you think that way, you had to be digital. You had to be in sustainability, you had to have customized product for clients, and you have to have the software background and capability that would take all of these pieces and put them together. So all three deals just worked beautifully. I was thrilled with it.
That's terrific. So strategy trumps timing then?
Well, I tell other CEOs when I talk about, I like to call new CEOs when they get the job and just talk about the life of being a CEO. And, there are four things that matter in M&A. Number one is culture. If the organization materially brings down your culture, think of some of the old, mergers that were done in the banking sector 10 years ago and 20 years ago that have really destroyed a lot of banks around the world because culture destroys them. It has to be cultural neutral. That's number one. Number two, strategically, if it doesn't make strategic sense, you shouldn't go near it. Never do something through envy. It has to be able to be explained to somebody in an elevator very simply why this particular deal fits with you. The third is price. Honestly, plus or minus 10% never matters. Nobody looks back a decade later and says you paid 5% too much. No, the deal succeeds because the business logic worked or it doesn't work. And finally, timing is not your friend. Let's say you want to buy your neighbor's house down the street. You don't just walk in there and say, I want to buy your house. No, they have to decide they want to sell it. But when they decide they want to sell it, it may be inconvenient for you, but you have to move aggressively.
Absolutely, it's a great way to look at it. And I'd like to pick up on the first point you raised, actually, the culture piece. I know that you've actually framed Morgan Stanley's culture around sort of 5 key values. Are these values truly differentiating, and are they helpful as you integrate your acquisitions? Or is this just simply table stakes and this is what everybody does now, having purpose and values, and we drive on? How do you think about that?
Well, every organization, whether it's your local church or the schools or corporations, small businesses, they all have a value set, and some articulate them. We happen to put them on the walls of our buildings. Some people do that, some people write about them, some people talk about them. So you have to get past what the values say and see what the organization does. For example, one of our values is to give back. Give back to our communities. We don't think we exist separate from the societies we live in. And we owe them a debt because of our good fortune to help contribute to those societies. Give an example, during the pandemic, we helped, I think it was 20,000 street cart vendors in New York City. Nobody's going and buying coffee and donuts at the street cart vendor. Right? Think about it, but this is their life. So we gave money to support them. We supported the Broadway industry. You support your community. So give back. Every June, globally, every employee for part of that month stops and physically contributes to an organization to give back to their community. Maybe also financially contributes, but physically. We committed to, the other one I'll talk about is we recently added a fifth value, which was the commitment to diversity and inclusion. It came up, frankly, during the period of the Black Lives Matter movement last year. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt like we needed to be very clear-headed about the fact that anybody who works at Morgan Stanley belongs at Morgan Stanley. It is their firm as much as it is my firm. I don't care what their sexual orientation is. I don't care what country they grew up in. I don't care what color their skin is. I don't care what their religion is. None of that matters. I care that they're people of good values trying to help their colleagues, our clients, and the organization move forward. And for that, they need to belong. We needed to express that more consciously. So we added that, and we created an institute using an outside board to help us guide through some of the very thorny issues that come in this space. So that's two examples, Susan.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. So we've covered strategy, we've covered culture, we've covered your M&A. I'd really like to move on now to technology. And you talked about how the acquisition of Solium delivered some remarkable technology, and also E-Trade. When you actually think about how technology and the pandemic has really accelerated change, what is your view on the role of technology in the banking industry today and going forward, and how are you investing in technology? And I must tell you, James, you're not here in the room, but we've just come off just a very insightful conversation around crypto. So perhaps you could share some perspectives on, distributed ledger technology as well as we kind of go through this technology piece of the conversation.
Well, it's fascinating right now because everybody's talking about technology and decentralized finance and new forms of stored value in the form of cryptocurrencies and zero price trading and all of these things have arrived as though suddenly everybody woke up during COVID and said technology matters in finance. Well, ever since we've had ATM machines, technology has mattered. Morgan Stanley built the first equities electronic trading business in the mid-90s, thing called MSET. We've had deep technological roots across most of our businesses, not all. An M&A advisor is not using a lot of technology to provide their advice. Somebody dealing and providing prime brokerage services to quant hedge funds is using enormous technology to give them reports on their balances every day, execute their trades, and so on. So it's not like this has just begun. We spend over $4 billion on technology. We have cyber fusion centers here and in Europe and in Baltimore, staffed with hundreds of people tracking millions of attacks that we get literally every month across our whole landscape. We are managing electronically clients' data for over 10 million clients. So all of these, the technology didn't just arrive. Everybody suddenly got very excited about it, and crypto has become, the sort of, the latest movement, if you will. Now, what I've said about crypto, I don't know what your panel said, but first, I'm not an owner personally, because I've never quite understood what the barriers to entry are. There are other forms of crypto that can be created. Yes, there's enormous computing and energy time in producing it. I always thought it's open to regulatory risk, and I wasn't sure the world needed another form of stored value. But that said, merchants are starting to accept crypto. People who have less trust in the global financial systems are using crypto. Some bad actors are using crypto. It's not going away. What I've said publicly, I don't know if it's worth 60,000, 6,000 or 600, but it's worth something and it's not going away. It's not a fad. And obviously the blockchain technology that supports it is something that we're using across and developing across all of our businesses. Everybody's using that. So I think you need to think about technology as an evolution, not a revolution. You don't flip a switch and suddenly become a technology company. We use technology across every part of what we do at Morgan Stanley. And, you know, recently we just signed a major contract with Microsoft to move, not our only contract in the cloud space, but a major multi-year contract with Microsoft to move a lot of our platform into the cloud. That is a game changer for Morgan Stanley. So I think, Susan, it's, again, evolution, not revolution, but it is absolutely a core part of what companies like us are doing.
Absolutely. It's a great perspective, evolution, not revolution. Now, it's something that I took away from the last panel is, and a question actually that I think I'll leave this room thinking about is, you know, does crypto really remove the need for a trusted intermediary? That's really the question that sort of begs in my mind. I think that answer is no, because I think what comes with a trusted intermediary is advice. And so I actually think advice is a very big piece of an intermediary's responsibility, but I'd be grateful for your reaction to that idea. Does crypto really remove the need for a trusted intermediary?
Crypto is just a form of, I don't know if it's a currency or an asset, but it's a tradable good.
Yes.
And it has value as long as it functions according to what it's supposed to function at. So when you buy it, you actually buy something of value, and when you sell it, you get that value back. So I don't see it as displacing finance. I mean, it's another form of stored value, the same as gold or silver is a form of stored value. No, it doesn't change the role of the intermediary at all. I think what it does is arguably challenge the reserve bank systems around the world at its fullest extent.
Yes.
And that is something the reserve bank systems are not going to put up with at some point. So there will be regulation to control parts of it, and you're seeing that in China, and particularly has been on the sort of leading edge of that. But, you know, again, I see all of these things, if it's like the payment system is the part of the financial system most likely to be disrupted by technology. And you've seen that with Square, with Stripe, and with other companies. The consumer lending system, obviously, where people care about getting the money they're borrowing and paying the least interest rate for it. If you can provide things at a lower interest rate electronically, everybody's going to move to that. If you're asking for M&A advice, you're probably not going to go to a robot and ask it to explain how a different CEO is going to respond in a meeting if you put a hypothetical to them or not. You probably want the human nuance around that. I happen to think that'll stay pretty much forever. Maybe I'm wrong in 100 years, but I'm not wrong in 5 years or 10 years. So you can't look at the banking or financial system. It doesn't exist. What exists is hundreds of different business models. Project finance is not discount brokerage. Online trading is not M&A. Issuing equity is not debt capital markets, and so on. All of these are separate systems, and each of them have their own challenges and enabled by the technology supporting them. Got it. Thank you. It's a great. The absolutists seem to think things go. That's why I come back to my evolution, not revolution. By the way, the evolution can be the slope of the curve can be very steep. Yes. It can be very fast evolution. But the absolutists say the banking system will go away. That's ridiculous. What does that mean? What part of the banking system? Correspondent banking? Commercial lending? What are you talking about when you say banking systems go away? Yep. Break it down for me, specific products and services that will be replaced. Then we can have a thoughtful discussion around. Absolutely. I think our view would be payments is probably the first step. I would agree with that. And that's really where we'll see the continued evolution first is certainly our house view. But I only thought American Express, which started in 1958, I think, with the charge card, yes, was the first part of that evolution.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I've only got you for another minute. Just last closing thoughts on ESG. Morgan Stanley has really prioritized ESG. Any thoughts you'd like to leave with the group on ESG and how your firm is really embracing the priority?
Well, I think the focus has been initially good corporate governance, the G. Almost all the focus now is on the environment, the E, and less on the social factors that make up ESG. So I think the corporate governance piece will always be a piece of work that needs molding, but is well molded. The E part has arrived. I mean, there are still people who think the climate isn't changing, the planet isn't heating. I'm not a scientist, but I tend to believe that people, the science that I've read and absorbed would suggest that it is, and we should do something about it. And I think every institution, whether it's Morgan Stanley, committing to zero emissions by 2050 and the rate of change by 2030, whether it's the several million tons of plastic we're going to remove from the oceans, everybody has a role to play in this. What is most interesting about ESG is where the social aspect of ESG starts to kick in and how that changes how companies and institutions behave. And that's for the future. But right now, impact investing, if you haven't got capability as an asset manager in that space, you're going to miss out. Individuals want to put their money to work in the places that meet their personal values. That's a fact, and that's the way the world has evolved.
Absolutely. Well, James, on behalf of the group in the room and online, merci. Thank you for being with us today. It's been really a privilege to have the opportunity to explore both leadership themes and strategy with you at what is hopefully this last inning of our pandemic. So thank you very much for joining us by video from New York City.
Thank you, Susan. Merci beaucoup.